Hello, everyone. Welcome to our stream with Fiveable here today on the Maritime empires during the period from 1450 CE to 1750 CE, what we call the early modern period in AP World History Modern. I just want to get some comments on my audio and video right now. Can you guys hear me all right? See me all right? If you guys have any problems, please let me know because I want to change that and make sure to comment all of you. Thank you, Mr. Diorto. Okay, so now with that said, I'll pull up my slideshow to show you guys here today, and we can get started. All right. So again, like I said before, the structure of today's presentation will be on the Maritime empires during the period from 1450 to 1750 CE. Now, this early modern period actually accounts for nearly 10% or 12% of the AP examination, as according to the course description published by College Board. So it's a very, very hefty element of the AP exam, something that I love teaching about and learning about. So first of all, who am I? I'm a lifelong learner. I love the humanities. I love world history, and that's why I'm a part of this stream team. I'm really looking to spread my knowledge with regard to the Columbian Exchange, things like this, the empires of the maritime world, the empires of the wind during this period, because I love that stuff. That's my jam, and I'm just very glad to be able to teach you guys these kinds of things here today. I'm a sophomore from the high school of Alliance Academy for Innovation in Georgia, and I took AP World History as a freshman last year. I received a 5 on the 2019 AP World History exam, which is obviously loads different than your exam this year. I also received a 790 out of 800 on the 2019 SAT subject test in world history. So this is really my jam. I love teaching people about world history, talking to people about world history, and that's just what I love doing. So I'm very glad to be able to share my knowledge with you here today. So first of all, before we begin with our slideshow, what is Fiveable? And I'm sure you guys know what Twitch is, and Twitch is kind of a platform for gamers, and it connects the gamers, the streaming gamers, to people who watch them in a more seamless platform. We have seamless streamer to viewer connections and end-to-end interaction and learning, as the gamers can really interact with their streamers and watch them play, learn from them, things like this. So Fiveable uses a Twitch type platform to emulate the platform that you learn in school. So we really try to provide a supplement to in-class learning through, again, boundless connections, boundless interactivity, and learner inclusion. As you can see here, we have a huge poll section. We have a comment section. We have many strategies to help you guys improve your AP World History learning. And I see Donald Diorto shouting me out. He's one of our greatest AP World History teachers, and he's really, all of our staff here are here to prepare you for the AP examination later in May. So Fiveable membership, and as I'm sure a lot of you are watching our platform today with a free membership. Fiveable has a freemium platform where you can watch any of our streams for free by just viewing our website and going in and joining them while they're live. But also we offer a Fiveable Plus platform where any viewer who has this $5 a month membership, which is cheaper if you buy it per year, but Fiveable Plus membership allows you to view all of our documents and streams from the past in a big library. So I would say it's a great investment for any of you AP World History students or budding AP students in any subject, because it gives you guys kind of a great library to view any of our streams even when they're not live. And that's just a transformational tool, especially when you're trying to get the most from your sessions. All right, so some streams coming soon later this week and later in the month. On November 10th, later today, we have Taking Notes from Lecture with Jamal Willis at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So I know this is a little bit late for you guys in the East Coast, but it's just a very great stream that I feel a lot of you can really benefit from, because Jamal Willis, I've done a similar stream with him before, and this guy is the bomb. I mean, he's very good at talking about note structures and things like this in AP World History, so you guys can really benefit from him teaching. And on November 12th, 2 days later, we have the Age of Revolutions from 1775 to 1830 CE with Patrick Lassiter at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Mr. Lassiter is one of my favorite teachers in the AP curriculum. I learned from him in AP World History, his YouTube videos last year. So I feel like he has a very interactive stream coming up, and revolutions are very interesting to me. We're going to be learning about the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and many revolutions as such. Again, that's on Tuesday this week at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And next we have on November 13th, competing empires from 1450 to 1750 CE with one of our best teacher streamers in the chat today, Donald Diorto, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's just a very, very good stream for any of you looking at these empires, the gunpowder empires and these maritime empires. And Mr. Diorto put his link to his stream in the comments section. So if you guys want to view that stream, feel free to go ahead and look at it from the comment section. But yeah, it's a very great stream. I would encourage you to go view this stream because it kind of gives you guys a supplement, a complement to what I'm teaching you guys here today. And then on the same day, we have on November 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 hour later, it's Decolonizing the Age of Exploration and the Age of Revolutions in World History with Eric Beckman, another one of our best AP World History teachers here with Fiveable. And this is kind of directed towards teachers, but I will be attending the stream. It's very interesting to me, and it can prove kind of a good outline for you guys learning AP World History Modern because it gives you a very, very good way to jumpstart your learning to prepare yourself for the AP curriculum. Okay, so without further ado, let's talk about what I'm going to be talking about within today's stream. So first of all, I'll be giving you guys an early modern period overview, a kind of an objective overview of what was going on to kind of set the stage for this maritime empire revolution, the empires of the wind, and then we'll be talking about the impetus for global expansion and trade, because this didn't come out of nowhere. There was a lot of things leading up to the global expansion and trade that occurred during these maritime empires. And then we also have the emergence of maritime empires. I'll be talking about kind of the history of what was going on during this period and the main maritime empires to know. And then the long-term effects of this period, because they're hefty. There's a lot of long-term effects of this period that you can learn from, that you can really use on SAQ questions, multiple choice questions, and LEQ questions on the AP examination, because the continuities part of it in AP World History and Modern is huge. And I think if you guys really focus on the effects, you can benefit a lot in the AP World History curriculum. And then after that, we'll be talking about some document analysis and written practice. We'll be having an SAQ first to lead it off, and then 3 multiple choice questions as curated by our head in AP World History, Eric Beckman. So again, as Eric Beckman said, feel free to check out the poll in today's stream because I've posted 2 questions talking about your own experiences with Fiveable and your experiences as an AP student in the curriculum. And then lastly, we'll be having a Q&A period, which is kind of where I'll answer any of your questions with regard to what the AP World course is, some studying tips, and just content-related information. Okay, so let's talk about an introduction. So first of all, I would like you guys to answer in the comments section, what is a maritime empire? I'll give you guys a few minutes to answer this question here. Anything you know about maritime empires, leave it in the comments section. I'd love to hear from you guys. So anything at all about maritime empires? All right, I'll give you guys a few more minutes. If you don't feel like talking, that's all right, but I would really encourage you to be active in this session, because being active in class, being active in lectures can really help you guys out in the long run. So definitely give you guys a few minutes, but try to put any of your input. So Aaron Brusek just said empires that consist of small pieces of land that are separated by large bodies of water. In essence, this is true. And then Pritham Patel said empires that control trade and the production, not the people and territory. So going back to what Aaron Brusek said, they do consist of small pieces of land in some cases, but they're also separated by large bodies of water. Because again, we're talking about maritime empires. They're spread out over very, very large pieces of land. And as Pritham said, they control trade and production, because the main focus of these maritime empires is to control trade. And that's why they have such extensive empires, because they have many, many, many people integrated within the empire with regards to trade and things like that. They do control people and territory in some cases, but the main focus of the maritime empires is upon trade. Anything else, you guys? All right, so next we have another question. Can you guys name any maritime empires that first come to mind from this period or the last period or future periods? Just any maritime empires that can provide a good example for us here today. And I'm very glad that you guys answered these questions, because it gives me some points to talk off of, and it gives me some points to kind of help you guys with regard to your own knowledge of maritime empires before we start this session. So anything about some old maritime empires, new maritime empires that we see during this period, just let Yeah, don't be shy. I mean, answer the questions in comment section because it can really help you if you kind of name these empires and, be interactive. All right, a few more seconds, you guys. Any maritime empires, feel free to guess. I mean, if you're wrong, you're wrong. It's okay. That's what we're here for. We're teaching you about maritime empires, so don't be afraid if you're wrong. Spain. So yes, Paige, that's a very, very great example, and I see you, Protham, answering to the Portuguese. We're going to be highlighting both of these empires during our stream here today, and the Spanish were one of the biggest maritime empires later on, before they were eclipsed by the English, of course, but the Portuguese were the pioneers of the maritime empires, and you won't ever need to know all of them. Again, as we said, but be able to generate one or two examples as you guys have. The Portuguese and Spanish are great examples because the Portuguese are pioneers, the Spanish are continuous. So I think those are great examples, you guys, and I applaud you for making an attempt, and that's some great examples. So let's talk about gunpowder empires first of all. So gunpowder empires are what we call these land empires, and they really extend their control over ethnically diverse populations because, again, these are land empires. They're conquering territory much like the Roman Empire, these old empires like the Mesopotamian Empire, and they have very ethnically diverse populations because they just eclipse so many religions and so much territory. They also need large militaries and navies to kind of accommodate this territory and to continuously maintain this territory, which costs a lot of money, and that's what really characterizes these gunpowder empires. We also see gunpowder empires be dependent upon native collaborators and extended their rule as a traditional empire because, as we see with the Romans and the Persians of the past periods, they really rely upon native commanders and these native people to kind of expand their rule and not have direct rule like third-party rule. And we also see advanced military technologies as we can compare with advanced maritime technologies with these new maritime empires. So with these huge maritime empires, they control trade via the connection and jurisdiction of limited ports. So much like the Portuguese and Spanish, they have very big trade ports across their empire, which really connect different parts of the world into a big consolidated territorial realm. And we also they colonize limited territory because with these gunpowder empires, they're all about colonizing territory. And these maritime empires are not so much about that. They're more about enticing trade and things like this. And then we also have advanced maritime technologies as compared with advanced military technologies because these gunpowder empires, they're really focused upon making their ships bigger, making their navigation systems better, making the maps more accurate. So that's what really bolsters them and helps their trade during this period. So characterize these gunpowder empires by land, by diverse populations, large militaries and advanced military technologies, and native collaborators. And just these maritime empires by maritime technologies and limited territory and just trade. That's your big focus here, these trading ports. And we'll talk much more about this later on. So a few big examples of the early modern period. First of all, we have the Renaissance, kind of a basic overview of this period. The Renaissance was occurring during this period, and this was bolstered by European discoveries during the now notorious Crusades. Because during this Crusades period, as I'm sure you guys have learned about in your AP World History course, the Europeans were exposed to a lot of their old technologies and their old scriptures that were kept by the Middle Eastern peoples. And so the Renaissance began as a heavily focused period that focused upon the old discoveries of the Europeans and also upon personal achievement. And then we have the Reformation. So the Catholic Church was very power hungry during this period, and they were getting headstrong kind of, and they actually had things like the very corrupt things. And so Martin Luther listed forth major grievances in his 95 Theses against the Roman Catholic Church, which inspired the rise of Protestantism in areas like France, England, and Germany. So religion was really diversified during this period because of the rise of Protestant sects like Lutheranism, like Calvinism, and just different sects that were different from the normal Christianity and that stressed the Bible over everything else. And it often stressed the Roman Catholic Church as kind of subsidiary and not as the main thing that spread Christianity. And then we have the scientific revolution because spread by discoveries of scientists like Copernicus and Galileo, we have many scientists go against the norm of the Roman Catholic Church through inductive reasoning and the scientific method. And then the last revolution during this period is the Enlightenment. a new social order. So philosophers like John Locke, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, they kind of established the idea of a social contract in light of resentment towards the federal government. And because of this social contract idea, the government's become much, much more accommodating for the people, and they help the people out. So all you need to know about this period is many, many revolutions in ideological thought and the physical actions of governments, of scientists, of religion, of the church, and of artists and artisans. So first of all, let's kind of review a stimulus here today. I want you guys to kind of analyze this prompt. So Fort Jesus, there's a picture of Fort Jesus, Mombasa, East Africa, titled Book of the Plans of all the fortresses, cities, and towns of the state of East India. Antonio Boccaro, Portuguese Chronicle and Geographica, 1665, intended for the King of Spain and Portugal, which again, their crowns were really connected during this period. If you guys can look at the little fort diagram that we've listed here today, and also the label that we have for the stimulus, and list out some of the things you guys see with regard to hippo analysis, the historical importance, the individual importance, the purpose, and the point of view. So the context, just the purpose, and how the author is trying to use this document. So please list out what you guys think about this fort. Anything you notice about the prompt, important things you might notice. So historical context, intended audience, purpose, and point of view. List out what you guys know about this, and then we'll go from there. All right, y'all. So for historical importance, the Portuguese trading post empire was really, really, really huge during this period. And you can see that they're establishing plans of fortresses, cities, and towns in the state of East India. And it's very, very great, as we're seeing during this period. Mombasa was off that, and it's just a great example of Portuguese trading post empire, which was preeminent during this period. And again, as Mr. Giorgio said, the prompt is a Eurocentric point of view, and that's what we're talking about, intended audience. So the intended audience here is clearly for the King of Spain and Portugal, and it's a Eurocentric point of view towards this, because the natives might not have viewed this fort as this big, as this glorious, and as this colorful. And so it's kind of a more Eurocentric point of view as how the forts were and how they looked and how they're supposed to, have the platform for their functioning. And then point of view and purpose are kind of relevant with this. They're kind of intended to, display Portuguese dominance of the kings of Spain and Portugal. And the point of view was from a guy who really respected the Portuguese expansion and trade during this period. And then this next prompt is actually the city walls at Malacca, or Malacca in the Indian Sea at 1604, drawn by Manuel Godinho de Heredia, a Malay Portuguese writer and geographer. And as you can see here, again, it's a Eurocentric point of view because it's a Portuguese writer and geographer. And I think this document as well may have been intended for a royal audience. We don't know that for sure, but we do see many, many remnants of Portuguese nationalism and things like this, because the Portuguese fort is very, very heavily laid out as a royal faction and also as a place for cultural dispersion, which is true of these Portuguese forts. So what was occurring during this period, as Mr. Beckman said, to get an idea of the African point of view, the Swahili word for prison derives from the Portuguese word for church. So the Africans, especially the Moluccans, they just hated the Portuguese forts because they were just impeding upon their culture, impeding upon the trade, and putting up taxes for their own goods. So I feel like it'd be much, much more different from an African point of view, and it definitely would have been. But these forts are something that the Portuguese prided and they believed to be something of them spreading their own culture, their own religion, their Roman Catholicism. And then we'll talk about a little bit of gunpowder empires that dabble in the age of exploration. So the Ottoman Portuguese competition in the Indian Ocean. So as you know, the Ottomans are a gunpowder empire. They're a land-based empire, and the Portuguese are a maritime empire, as you mentioned before when y'all mentioned. So the Portuguese have much, much more maritime trading posts across the region, and much more coastal cities to kind of facilitate this dispersion of the realm. And we see many, many, many elements of cultural transfusion during this period. And the Ottomans were much, much more secluded on their landmass and had less trading ports. So as you can see, the Ottomans did have a good navy. They did do some of these trading post-empire kind of things, but the Portuguese were much, much more involved, as were many maritime empires. So let's go into the main basics of the maritime empires, the impetus for global expansion and trade. So as for centuries, the Europeans and Asians have been trading through Arab middlemen. And these Arab middlemen, as you can see, were spiking up prices because for Europeans to transport goods to Asia, which wasn't that important, they were spiking up prices. And for Asians to kind of transport goods to the Europeans, their goods would cost more because the Arab middleman was spiking up prices to kind of get a royalty off them, as many companies do in today's world. So to get rid of these Arab middlemen, the Europeans actually wanted to have a direct route to Asia, and they ended up finding one through the Portuguese, which pioneered this kind of period. And the impetus for this global expansion and the way that this was made possible was through adopted advancements and truly fueled transoceanic travel and facilitated the rise of maritime empires. And a huge amount of technological discoveries helped this happen. So first we see a three-masted caravel. If you don't know what that is, they're actually ships, big ships that are swift and hefty, which use lateen sails. And lateen sails are highly maneuverable sails that allow ships to deliver provisions to different lands because they're very highly maneuverable, and they allow the ships to use the wind, use the monsoon season to really jumpstart their own status. And so, as we're seeing in the comments section, let's go back to the Strait of Malacca. The pirates are very common during this within this strait, as Mr. Giorgio and Mr. Beckman are talking about here. But back to this point about technologies. We see the three-masted caravel again, which allows for navigation and the transportation of provisions. And we see the astrolabe. So the astrolabe was a technology developed way back when in the Hellenic world by the Greeks. It was a navigational device that allowed sailors to accurately determine their latitude by stargazing. And it determined their latitude by looking at their distance between themselves and the stars high up above. And it was almost like a little, a cylindrical thing where you could kind of spin to find out where your location was in terms of latitude and things like this. So the astrolabe was a very determinant tool. We're talking about latitude. We're talking about where you were in relation to these empires. The magnetic compass. So we see drifting into the hands of Europeans through extensive Eurasian trade. The magnetic compass allowed traders to determine direction regardless of their distance from land. So the magnetic compass was developed in China, and it really allowed for Europeans to kind of bolster their trade. And I see Pratham asked the question, what were some technological advancements in the Qing dynasty? Now that comes very later on, but if I do remember right, the Qing dynasty were very heavy on paper making. They were heavy on poem making, which aren't generally technological advancements, but they did have some, which we'll talk about later on. But right now we're talking about the magnetic compass that wasn't developed under the Qing, but it was in China. And a lot of these technologies we're talking about, paper making was developed in China, which led to better map making. Magnetic compass was developed in China, which allowed for much better navigation during this period. And I do believe that we have the stern post rudder developed in China, which acted as a tool for navigation and the steering of ships during this period. So we also have the Volta do Mar. So the Portuguese actually created a tool called the Volta do Mar, and it wasn't really a technology, but it did allow for the navigation of the monsoon seasons around Africa and around Asia, because the Volta do Mar was kind of a route that allowed for the Portuguese to capitalize upon these winds and to use them for navigation to capitalize and advantage them. And we see the stern post rudder, as you were saying, for Pratham, there was developed in China, and it was kind of an additive supplement to ships, which allowed for them to steer better. And then we have Johannes Gutenberg's printing press, which allows for the efficient dissemination of information, especially European maps and Asian maps. This was kind of a successor of the Chinese paper-making system, and it was a very essential tool. And again, as Mr. Beckman said, the Qing can be considered one of the gunpowder empires. So because and we'll talk about this later on, but the Ming Dynasty was kind of making a dabble into oceanic travel as a maritime empire. But as time passed, the Ming Dynasty fell to the Qing rulers, but the Qing didn't really want to expand the rule over the maritime realm because the Confucian people were against it, and it just was an overextension of their power, and they wanted to remain inlands. And also, they were having a hard time with trade and people from Europe trying to take their land. And they did create a lot of gunpowder weapons, as Mr. Beckman was saying. But yes, we had many. They actually emphasized poems. They emphasized the arts, and that was one of their main things as a gunpowder empire. To answer your question, but the main advancements during this period were kind of limited to maritime advancements, especially as these empires in Asia and in Europe tried to find a way to deliver their goods past the Arab middlemen and between these continents. So let's talk about the historical emergence of maritime empires. So from 1450 to 1550 CE, first of all, we see the 1340 to 1410 CE. We see the Sultanate of Malacca or Malacca was established, integrating a center for international trade that was heavily aligned with the Ming Dynasty. So as I was saying before, the Malacca Strait was heavily involved with pirates. There was a lot of piracy on this strait, but they were also very involved with the Ming Dynasty because they were one of the tributary states of the Ming Dynasty, and they offered tribute in the form of taxes to this dynasty. And that meant there was a lot of trade going on between the Strait of Malacca, which was kind of downwards in the Indian Ocean, and also the Ming Dynasty in China. And we see from 1360 to 1460 CE, the Prince Henry the Navigator. That's a name to know in the terms of maritime empires, because Prince Henry the Navigator was actually a prince who was not a king for the country of Portugal, and he established a heavy school of navigation, an astronomical observatory with his own money in Sagres, Portugal. And because of this, he actually trained the next generation of map makers, next generation of astronomers, and next generation of sailors and navigators, which made Portugal the prime time region, the prime time country to kind of bolster your own knowledge in these kinds of technologies and to really bolster the trade going forth. We also see from 1380 to 1620 CE, the Hanseatic League served to expand the merchant class and to spread the concept of mercantilism across Europe. Now, the Hanseatic League, if you guys don't know, is kind of a loosely tied connection of German states and German nationalities of middle-class people. And these people are really, really merchant-based. They're merchant-centric, and these towns were really stressing the importance of merchants. And that's why mercantilism became a very, very essential thing later on, partly because of the Hanseatic League and their prominence during this period. And we see in 1390 CE, Africa starts to make a play. The Congo Empire formed as a heavily organized, self-sufficient imperial territory in Africa and aligned itself with the Portuguese and other European entities to profit from the slave trade. So you can see many, many empires, including the Ashanti Kingdom and the Congo Kingdom, really try to profit upon the slave trade during this period and align themselves with many European empires which wanted slaves. And lastly, we also see from 1400 to 1430 CE, Zheng He's voyages. So when we're talking about the Qing dynasty, the predecessor of the Qing dynasty was actually the Ming dynasty. And the Ming dynasty was actually the successor of the Yuan dynasty. The Yuan dynasty was a Mongol-led dynasty which kind of curbed Chinese influence and kept the Chinese from ruling their own realm. And though it did a lot of good for China, it also destroyed Chinese culture, and that's why the Ming dynasty tried to ensure this dominance of this culture by sending people like Zheng He to kind of reinstate their maritime might. And Zheng He used thousands of Chinese junks to spread the news of the Yongle Emperor's ascension and to really garner tributary states for China and to lead the Ming dynasty as an early maritime empire, which kind of disseminated because we can see later on that the Confucian scholars didn't like what the Yongle Emperor was doing with the maritime empire route of the Ming dynasty. And because of the Confucian emperor's descent, we see the Yongle Emperor kind of take back efforts from Zheng He to establish this empire. And because of this, the Qing dynasty and the later Ming dynasty becomes heavily gunpowder related and defensive. They didn't conquer much territory from a maritime perspective. Okay, some later involvements in 1492 CE. We see Christopher Columbus, who's a very, very good name in world history and just history in general, because Christopher Columbus, his accidental voyage to South America spurred future westward exploration and heavily influenced the development of maritime empires. Because if you're thinking about it, Christopher Columbus opened this huge, huge, huge place, this huge, huge, huge country, territory, whatever you want to call it, of land. And this huge place of land was a perfect situation for these European territories, these Asian territories, to kind of put their flag in and develop their maritime empires more so and to get their taxes from these peoples. We also see in 1530 CE, the Mughal Empire was established, which provided a means for European maritime traders to procure valuable wines and spices. And the Mughal Empire was not a maritime empire, but it did kind of provide an impetus for maritime empires to form because they had valuable spices and valuable Islamist handmade crafts and things like this. So it leads to the formation of joint stock companies like the British East India Company and the Dutch VOC, two names to remember. And they really, really, were involved in India and in this Mughal Empire trade. And lastly, in 1550 CE, the British Empire began to take shape as the idea of mercantilism led entities as such into expanding their maritime reach. Because before this, the British Empire was kind of first of all, a gunpowder empire, and second of all, an empire that didn't really want to expand mercantilism. It wasn't a very influential empire. And if you know anything about the British Empire, after 1550 CE, they went into a huge Elizabethan age of maritime expansion, of land expansion, and just expansion in general. So some later advancements in the emergence of maritime empires from 1550 to 1650 CE. In 1560 CE, we actually see the beginning of the Elizabethan age right after this English resurgence. And the Elizabethan age was a period in which the British experienced a virtual revival in the arts, kind of like a renaissance for just the British. And they just have a lot of really influential artwork and really influential books and pamphlets during this period. We also see Queen Elizabeth I's work to colonize territories elsewhere. She colonizes territories in the New World through expeditions with the Plymouth colony and things like this later on. But just know the Elizabethan age from 1560 CE was the beginning of all of this. And then next we have in 1580 CE, the Protestant Dutch provinces declare their independence from Spain, and this really creates the Dutch Empire. The Dutch Empire was very, very essential, and they were very, very prominent because the Dutch Empire kind of stressed the imperial reign of territories through a maritime empire, and they really had a lot of trading posts, just like the Portuguese, and they established their own trading posts in New Amsterdam. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but the basics is in 1580 CE, the Protestant Dutch provinces declared their independence and established a huge trading post empire. In 1590 CE, this is a very, very essential year in the realm of AP World History and AP Euro because Queen Elizabeth I defeated the Spanish Armada in this year. And because of this defeat of the Spanish Armada, the English Navy was the #1 maritime empire kind of in the world at this point. And because of this, England became very, very expedited. They were able to sponsor voyages into India, into other realms, into Asia, into the New World, and just to sponsor the development of territories and spheres of influence across these different realms. So 1590 CE is almost as important as the Elizabethan age just because of the Spanish Armada and this invasion. 1600 CE is called the beginning of the Edo period or the Tokugawa shogunate. Because before this period, the Japanese were kind of making very, very heavy advances into becoming a prominent westernized empire, but a guy named Tokugawa Ieyasu established his shogunate in Japan. And he saw the influence of European colonization and Christianity, and he heavily worked to seclude Japan from all Western influence, especially against the spread of Christian faith. And the only port that was allowed for Christian influence or any European influence was Canton. And Canton was allowed for Dutch influence because the Dutch were kind of hands-off in the strategy towards China, unlike the British and the French and the Spanish. But you can see these kind of empires because during this period we see a lot of maritime expansion, a lot of just cultural spread and cultural connections. But because of this, in 1600 CE, Japan was completely secluded. A positive of this was they developed their own unique culture, but the negative was they were kind of taken off from these maritime empires, and the maritime empire was not able to connect with Japan. Japan was kind of secluded. They didn't have westernized economy after this. And in 1640 CE, we see the tyrannical rule of Charles I leads to the English Civil War, which creates friction between loyalists and parliamentary factions of English territories in the New World. So I was talking about in 1560 CE to 1590 CE, many, many English territories are thriving during this period, but in 1640 CE, we're seeing these English territories start to deteriorate because of English tension within England due to the English Civil War, which you need to know about because their maritime holdings were kind of kept from a statistical standpoint, on hold, and they weren't really expanding maritime or establishing new territories in the New World. So next we have from 1650 to 1750 CE. In 1650 CE, there was a huge religious war called the 30 Years' War, and the Peace of Westphalia was signed. And France gained the westward territory of Alsace-Lorraine in western France today, which really increased their imperial might because the more territory a country gained, the more viable it was to produce a maritime empire. That's exactly what they did during this period. Next, we see 1710 CE, Germany's triumph in the War of Spanish Succession leads to the transfusion of French territory into the hands of the English, further fueling England's emergence as an imperial superpower. So because of the War of Spanish Succession and the transfusion of French territory, England becomes an imperial superpower, and it's able to kind of put this money and territory towards its expansion into the New World and the maritime realms. And next, we see in 1720 CE, the Qing dynasty bans Christianity. So if we're talking about the Qing Dynasty, Pratham, I can't give you much information about the maritime improvements that happened there, but the Qing Dynasty did ban Christianity, and that did kind of signify them as an anti-maritime empire kind of region, because they didn't want a lot of influence from Christianity, and they didn't want a lot of trade occurring between both these regions. So the Qing Dynasty, along with the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan, were really, really secluded empires that were isolationist and adopted isolationist policies to prevent westernization and maritime trade. And in 1760 CE, trade in the Qing realm, as we were talking about earlier, was limited to the port city of Canton, bringing forth heavy maritime trade that in return inflated the Qing economy. In 1800 CE, and sorry about that, I actually mixed up the Qing Dynasty with the Tokugawa shogunate. I know the Tokugawa shogunate did allow trade in only one spot, but I do forget that spot. But do know that the Qing Dynasty had only trade in Canton to bolster their maritime trade. But in 1800 CE, as the Portuguese Empire spearheaded efforts to establish a trading post empire between West Africa and East Asia, other European entities established realms of influence in India and Southwest Asia. So the Portuguese Empire was kind of making a good note in this huge landmass between India and West Africa and East Asia, and like the British and the French were really, really zeroing in on Asia and India because that was their main territorial offering that they wanted to capitalize upon during this period. So without further ado, let's kind of go into some case studies with different maritime empires. Do you guys have any questions about the history of maritime empires, how this kind of came about before we go into some case studies? Yeah, any questions you guys have, any clarifications you guys need, if I need to go back to a couple slides and explain some things, do let me know. I'm very happy to be able to do that. So I'm just looking for any comments you guys have. And also, if I'm going too fast, let me know, because I am trying to kind of pace myself during this stream. So if I'm going too fast, let me know so I can prove that for you guys. You guys have a few minutes here to answer or ask any questions. All right, so if we don't have any questions, we'll move forward to case studies. If you guys have any questions that come up as we're speaking, we will make sure to answer them. And as Eric Beckman said, any of the details could be evidence. Yes, for the Qing Dynasty, any of the details could be evidence of their overall technological improvements. And yeah, gunpowder with the Qing Dynasty. But here we go. So the case study of the Portuguese Empire. So why was the Portuguese Empire so important and so influential during the age of maritime empires? It's because of their position on the southwestern coast of the European continent, because this position made them very, very close to Africa and very, very close to Asia through a lot of straits, naval straits. So it really helped them with regard to their overall location, and they have strong-willed leadership that was very religious. They're under Roman Catholicism, and they had a technological prowess. Sorry for my pronunciation there, but it set the stage for such discoveries, because the main thing to know about this is the Prince Henry School of Navigation, as we mentioned earlier, because Prince Henry School of Navigation was so phenomenal, because this school allowed for further advancements on the part of sailors, navigators, map makers, and such people in general. We have Diaz and da Gama, first of all, as the first thing to happen with Portugal. So there's a guy named Bartholomew Diaz, which he was financed by Prince Henry the Navigator and the Portuguese federal government, and he actually made a voyage across the Cape of Good Hope, which is in the southern tip of Africa, as you can see in this map. But he went across downwards from Portugal to the Cape of Good Hope and across this kind of region, and he explored the western coast of Africa to the north and the south, the west, and the east. He really explored this kind of cape and the western advancements, and he led the way to the expedition of Vasco da Gama. So Vasco da Gama actually completed Bartholomew Diaz's voyage, and he went from the Cape of Good Hope to the maritime city of Calicut. Calicut is actually a city in India, and that was their main goal of Bartholomew Diaz. And Vasco da Gama was the first to make this huge expedition, which led to greater expeditions by later explorers during this period to kind of get to the riches and the spices in India. So next we have the Treaty of Tordesillas. So as we're seeing here, there's two big preeminent empires that wanted to take a territory of the maritime realm, and it was Spain and Portugal. the two empires that were discussed, and we're talking about naming the empires. Kudos to you guys for naming these empires. They're the first pioneers of the Maritime Empire's realm. So in 1494, the Pope actually drew a longitudinal line dividing their territories. It's called the Treaty of Tordesillas, and it's called the territorial line. And this proclamation led to much of the New World being taken by the Spanish, and they had no idea this was so much territory because the Pope was kind of just drawing this line based on randomization, personal whim. So he drew this line, and this line gave the Spanish a huge amount of territory in the New World, and most of the territory was theirs to keep. Obviously, other people like the British and French and the Russians challenged their own jurisdiction of this territory, but the Portuguese did get to keep their trading post empire in Eurasia, and they also did get some territory in Brazil, which allowed them to kind of gain territory and to expand their maritime empire. And the Portuguese and maritime empire, as a result, was kind of limited to their trading post empire. And the trading post empire was kind of a set of cities across the coast of Africa, coast of East Asia, the coast of Malacca, and all of these trading posts. They were kind of rests for voyagers and for sailors and for traders, and they spiked up costs for people to trade goods. They were kind of a ruling economy which made costs higher for people to buy goods and people to sell goods, a taxation-based economy because of these trading posts in these empire. And also we have a guy named Cabral and a guy named Magellan as the later Portuguese explorers. Cabral is a very little known explorer in the Portuguese realm, and he accidentally discovered the territory of Brazil, which was the only New World territory of Portugal that they actually owned during this period. So it's very important to know that Cabral did so. And also Magellan, Ferdinand Magellan. I guess you guys have heard this name. I'm sure you guys have heard this name, but he did lead a voyage that after he was mutinied and he died, he did lead this voyage that led to the overall circle around the world by the Portuguese entities, his own crew. And the Portuguese were the first to do so, as followed by English explorers. All right, so our next case study here is Spain. And I think the reason for Spanish exploration is kind of self-evident here. But before I do go on, do you guys have any questions about Portugal? Any specific events you guys would like me to mention about Portugal? Questions about why they were important, why these events were important? Please do let me know. I'll give you guys a few minutes to ask any questions here, because Portugal is a huge maritime empire that can provide a good example for later empires. So any questions, any at all, do let me know. I'm here to help. Yes, and Mr. Beckman just said, not to my knowledge, Cabral's voyage was described in the passage used for one of the practice SAQs last week. And if you guys do want to practice SAQ, I would recommend, if Mr. Beckman links this document, recommend this reviewing this voyage, because Cabral's voyage, again, the Brazilian territory was just Portuguese big territory in the New World, and how they profited, because Brazil was a great plantation-based economy, and they got a lot of stuff from this empire. So next, we do have a case study of Spain. So as I said, the reason for Spanish preeminence during this period is kind of self-explanatory, because they actually had just defeated the Moors when in 1492 they created expeditions under Christopher Columbus and later explorers, and they were kind of the really successful people before the English in the New World, because they established so much territory because of the treaties to Tordesillas and how much territory they got. So what happened with them was they had a king named King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who unified the entirety of Spain as a Roman Catholic state. And because of this, they just kind of banished the Islamic Moors from Spain, and they were kind of on a high of religious ethnicity and a nation state that was very committed to nationalism and religious, pushing religion, pushing God, pushing glory in the New World. And because of the Treaty of Tordesillas, later on, they subsidized the voyage of Christopher Columbus, who accidentally journeyed westward and opened up new opportunities into the New World. He actually thought he was going to Asia. That was his original vision. He wanted to go westward to get to Asia, which wasn't really, he kind of vastly misjudged the overall scope of the world, because he thought the world was much smaller than it actually is. And because of this, he was kind of in the blue here, and he ended up making a voyage to the West Indies. And then, inspired by Christopher Columbus's voyage and the Treaty of Tordesillas, we see in 1510 Juan Ponce de Leon explored Florida. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but I try my best. But Ponce de Leon explored Florida, and he established a Spanish realm in Florida. And he also, and Vasco, well, yeah, he established a Spanish realm in Florida, and Balboa explored the bulk of Central America, looking westwards into the Pacific Ocean and the name of Spain. So because of these early discoveries in 1510 by Juan Ponce de Leon and Balboa, the Spanish gained huge territories in Florida and in Central America. And last, we have the conquistadors, which are incited by the successes of Pizarro and Cortez in the mid-16th century, because under Francisco Pizarro and Hernan Cortez, the Spanish Empire conquered territory in the Incan realm, and the Aztec realm, which is huge, the hugest empires in South America. So the Spanish were getting territory in North America, Central America, South America. They were really everywhere during this period, and that's just how much of a big realm they were. And conquistadors began even after Pizarro and Cortez to emphasize the encomienda system, La Hacienda system, and the Incan Midas system. So that's just things they used, but we'll go into this a little bit later. We're talking about different systems that the conquistadors used. And then lastly, our last case study here, we're missing the English, which didn't really establish a heavy base in the New World, but we do have the Netherlands, or the Dutch, as many people like to call them. And I think the main impetus for the Dutch, creating territory and trading post empires across the world internationally, was to expand their religion and to expand their overall trading post empire. Because the Dutch, when they declared independence, they established themselves as a huge Protestant base. And for any Protestantism, French Huguenots, Protestants, they all came to the Dutch Netherlands to establish their own supremacy. And even the Pilgrims came there first to establish their own free realm. And the Puritans, many Puritans came over there. And it established itself as a trading superpower with Amsterdam in the Netherlands and many empires in the New World, just to kind of, show their importance. And a quick digress here, Mr. Beckman just linked the SAQ prompt. So, feel free to refer back to that presentation to kind of get some overviews of the main tenets described here. All right, so the Dutch East India Company, that was the Netherlands' first joint stock company. And I want to mention to you the Netherlands and the Dutch were very, very big on joint stock companies. And what joint stock companies are is when, people, investors pull their money together to finance expeditions over to the New World. And the Dutch were very, very, relevant and competent, and just they used joint stock companies so often. And so the Dutch East India Company was determined to discover a northwestern maritime passage across the New World to Asia. And the Dutch East India Company sponsored and inspired westward voyages, especially by Henry Hudson, who discovered the Hudson River in modern-day New York and established the Dutch territory of New Amsterdam later on. And the second thing the Dutch had was the New Netherland Company. And this was kind of made to complement the Dutch East India Company as another joint stock company. It was established in 1614 and made a profitable fur trade in the New World. But this fur trade was kind of short-lived because the Dutch had a small presence of traders in the New World. And they were established later on as the Dutch West India Company. So as you can see, a main trend here is trading post empires and also these joint stock companies. So lastly, we have the Dutch Gambit, the main thing that the Dutch had going for them. So the Dutch they conquered Spanish holdings in the West Indies in 1634 in response to growing Native American attacks in North America. So they didn't really want to diversify North America because their fur trade was being attacked, but they did want to have a plantation-based holding in the West Indies. And that's exactly what they did. So they expanded their maritime empire to what they needed to do, and they established these joint stock companies, which really made their maritime empire successful. So to give you guys a brief overview to characterize these different realms, the Portuguese had a trading post empire that was mainly limited to Asia, especially the Asia and Africa and the western coast, the Strait of Malacca. And they also had the Treaty of Tordesillas, which kind of limited their realm only to Brazil, the New World. The Spanish, they were very, very religious. They really operated on these three platforms that you learn about in world history very, very often. And we have God, gold, and glory. They just wanted to spread the Roman Catholicism. They wanted to spread their own glory, and they wanted to spread their wealth. And that's really how they operated here. And they had conquistadors to do so, and people like Christopher Columbus, this pioneered this revolution. And the Netherlands, the Dutch Netherlands, were very, very important in maritime empires because they established this main concept of joint stock companies later on. So let's talk about next the emergence of maritime empires, Afro-Eurasian developments during the early modern period. Because in the course CED for this course, you guys are going to want to kind of focus on the Afro-Eurasian developments. Because again, it's not just all Europe. There's many, many maritime empires in these other regions, and gunpowder empires as well in that regard. So the main concept to learn from this period is within the African continent, European entities began to embark on extensive trade missions aimed at procuring valuable metals from the continent, especially in places like the Kingdom of Congo, and the Swahili realm and the Ashanti realm. They had very valuable metals like gold and silver and things like this, and they traded with the Europeans for salts and usually random things. And they just established a huge trade here, along with the slave trade, and a missionary. They had a lot of missionaries, the Europeans in Africa, and so that was a very influential kind of thing. And European nations began to develop strong connections with well-established African nations, such as the Kingdom of the Congo and the Ashanti realm. Especially the Portuguese established a huge connection with this realm. Portuguese, Spanish, many empires, including the English, exported their resources and slave labor for the New World. Because as we're going into the New World, this encomienda system and this chattel labor, we're seeing native populations decimating. It's very it's hard to kind of comprehend how many Native Americans were killed, because it's just like so many millions, thousands of Native Americans were killed by the Europeans, and that's why they really relied upon this slave labor from Africa and this continent. And the Portuguese also established a major port city in Goa off of the western coast of India. It established a major trading post empire running through the Strait of Malacca. As I said earlier, the Portuguese were very heavy on Asian trade and the trade between these trading posts. And that's why they were so keen upon developing such a trading post empire and trading between different places during this realm. If you guys want any more knowledge about trading post empires or the Kingdom of Congo, the Ashanti Kingdom, please do let me know. I'll give you guys a few minutes to ask any questions, comments, add anything to this lecture. And I see Mr. Giorgio, Mr. Beckman helping me out a lot here, linking some expansion, like good presentation for you guys to review after this stream. And yeah, there's just a lot of great things we have here today that can help you guys. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about some more Afro-Eurasian developments. So in coherence with their institution of sea beggars to raid lacking Spanish settlements, the Dutch conducted major raids on Portuguese ships and trading posts, establishing itself as a major trading superpower. So I didn't mention this before, actually. I'll mention it right now. The Dutch, they really established their maritime realm by attacking segments of the Spanish Empire. Because the Spanish obviously had many ports in the New World, they had many ports in Africa and things like that. So what they did was they instituted sea beggars. And these sea beggars were kind of people who went out. They were kind of like pirates, and they established their own Dutch territories right next to these Spanish, or later on these Spanish and these English territories, and they really tried to attack these territories and make them their own. And that's why the Dutch Empire was such a trading superpower, because they wanted to establish their own realm in these English and these Spanish territories, and establish itself as a major trade superpower, because these sea beggars and this violence that was recurring within these territories, conquered by other realms. England and France also developed trading posts in India following this major trend. So the English East India Company and the French trading post empire was actually establishing major trading posts in India, which is actually a good thing to know, because India was actually conquered in full by the British East India Company later on, and this kind of is a predecessor to such an involvement. But they did have a lot of trade with the spices and different kinds of things that were occurring during this period in India, in Asia for that matter. And also note that both Japan and China remained virtually off limits during this period, because we're trying to stress their isolationist stance. They did not want people to come and to impede upon their territory, to gain their territory, and to make them more westernized. And so we just want to recognize that Japan and China were very isolationist during this period. And they were not maritime empires. They're not like maritime empires. That was just their stance. All right, so some of the major labor systems that emerged during this period were, first of all, chattel slavery. And chattel slavery was very heavily used in the New World. If you guys haven't talked about chattel slavery in your AP World History and Modern classes so far, chattel slavery is actually an extension of modern day slavery, or more like Civil War type slavery, wherein slaves were treated as property. And it was kind of a European-led form of slave labor centered around the concept of slaves as everlasting property that you never lose, and you can do basically whatever you humanly want with no restrictions. And that's just how it was. I think it was the most brutal form of slavery, during this period. That's in my opinion, but it was a very brutal form in any regard. As for any of these systems, the encomienda and hacienda systems were mainly used by the Spanish conquistadors, and they're very sharply different, but somewhat the same. The hacienda system was similar to modern-day plantations, and the encomienda system stressed stratified social order and intensive native labor. Because what happened was the Spanish Empire actually contracted different segments of land towards Spanish conquistadors, who got also native laborers to kind of work this land and to produce an agricultural importance of this land. And that's how they got their work done. They contracted these native laborers who were giving them for free, and they used these estates to kind of establish a plantation-based economy in the New World. And we also have indentured servitude. So indentured servitude is how countries that didn't really emphasize slavery brought people over the New World. And how it worked is basically a person who was coming over the New World would finance the voyage of a servant over to North America, South America, Central America. And because of this, the servant would have to serve for a designated amount of time, usually 10 to 20 years, for this landlord. And this provided them with a temporary source of labor, which didn't really compete with slavery until very, very later on, after the abolition of slavery in many regions. But indentured servitude was a way for European entities to kind of both encourage and stimulate migration over the New World, and also to establish labor and temporary labor to work about in the New World. And finally, we have the Incan Mita system. And this is kind of an example of the Spanish adopting, or the European superpowers adopting old types of labor. And the Mita system was actually adopted by the Incas to kind of control their population and to allow for the population to provide them with their labor needs for roads, for the infrastructural canals and things like that. So the Spanish adopted the Mita system to conscript individuals into mandatory forced labor, which obviously the surviving Incans really accepted, because they really had no choice under their former overlords, which were the Incans, the Incan government, which the Spanish really kind of tried to emulate through their adoption of the Mita system. So if you guys have any questions about the Mita system, indentured servitude, want me to repeat my descriptions of the encomienda hacienda systems, or the chattel slavery system, please leave it in the comment section. I'll be glad to answer them. I'll give you guys a few minutes to kind of relay your thoughts about this. All right, so without further ado, let's go on to the long-term effects of this early modern period and the maritime empires during this period. So first of all, we see slavery lead to a host of political, demographic, and cultural changes as African kingdoms gain a seat of prominence in important trade networks across Europe. So because the Congo kingdom and the Asante realm, they really had a major prominence in the metal trade, in the slave trade during this period, they established a heavy connection with the European entities and the Middle Eastern entities during this period. So the main importance that you're going to see from slavery is the African kingdoms gaining a much, much more intimate connection with the European empires, which we will see in the Europeans' big grab of territory in the next period. And then next we'll see European pressures upon formerly isolationist nations, as we're talking about China and Japan, will eventually break. And, through the Opium Wars, as we'll talk about later on, and the Meiji Restoration, both China and Japan will become everlastingly more westernized and become, much, much more open and westernized nation in future years, which is one of the long-term effects of their isolation during this period, how rapidly they modernized. And also, we see the Columbian Exchange start to take root, and it gives way to the dispersion of disease, religion, foods and crops, animals, and etc. And it allowed for a demographic growth in population in Europe and a demographic depletion in places like Africa, and especially the New World, because millions of natives were killed by these European diseases that transfused over to the New World. And finally, let me get back to the slide, we have European diseases. And I like to stress this as the most important effect of the maritime empires and the maritime age of exploration during this period. And it's just because these European diseases lead to a virtual decimation of native populations in the New World, while native crops lead to a major population growth in Eurasia. Because when we're having potatoes, maize, stuff like this go over to Europe, it's a major population growth, which becomes a staple of the population. But then when we have diseases like we talk about, the yellow fever. We talk about the influenza. Many of these huge diseases like smallpox and things like this really decimate the populations in the New World and lead to a native uproar under this guise. So that is kind of my overview of the whole Maritime Empire's realm. I will be going into a SAQ practice and a multiple choice question practice, but I do want to open up the floor for any questions as we go here today. Please ask me any questions that you guys have, and I will make sure to answer them as we go forth. But yeah, leave in the comment section, ask a question in the question bar. Okay, so if there's no more questions in the chat, and you guys can keep on asking, by the way, as I present this, we'll be going into an SAQ, a document analysis of this excerpt. So I'll read it out loud for you guys to analyze here, this excerpt. So world history historian Sanjay Subramaniam quoted in Smithsonian Magazine 2007, "The Portuguese drive was not simply to explore and trade. It was also to deploy maritime violence, which they knew they were good at, in order to tax and subvert the trade of others and to build a political structure, whether you want to call it an empire or not, overseas." So that's a very short excerpt that we're going to base our SAQ upon. So do you guys notice anything with regards to historical importance, intended audience, purpose, point of view? List out anything you see from this document, the main idea, the main gist of this document, the sourcing structures of this document. And thank you so much, Paige, for watching this. I'm glad to help in any way possible. I was in the same state as you last year. I was falling behind in my class, but I really caught up with Fiveable and the mentors that we have here. And it's just so much valuable information. So I'm glad that you're using this platform and it's helping you out, because that's the goal we have here. But if you guys do want to kind of tell us about what you see from this document, the different tenets, the sourcing of this document before I go into it. And yes, if you guys enjoy the stream, Paige, definitely go to Donald's stream on Wednesday, because it's kind of a continuation of my stream, and it kind of is my stream plus Gunpowder Empires. So it's kind of a supplement of this stream, and Mr. Donald Diorto is a great teacher. I'd like to emphasize that. So definitely make sure to go ahead and, register for that stream. Okay, so let's go into the hippo analysis of this document. So historical importance. We're talking about the Portuguese trading post empire and their maritime empire during this period. And the intended audience, I think it is usually people who are reading historical accounts and modern people. So it's not really likely to be containing much bias on the part of the author. And the point of view is kind of to inform the audience. The purpose is kind of to tell the audience about how the Portuguese really stressed taxing and subverting the trade of others, because trading was their main goal. They weren't trying to convert people as much as they were trying to trade, is the main standpoint of the author, Sanjay Subramaniam. So he really stressed how they're trying to expand their own realm, and to expand their own money, to expand their own wealth, and to expand their own maritime importance and their empirical realm. So here are a few of our SAQ questions we'll be asking. First and foremost, I do want to bring up, here we go. All right, so the first SAQ question, the first SAQ prompt is to identify one example that supports Subramaniam's argument. So if you guys can please comment your answers, very, very short. Make sure to go into just one example that supports Subramaniam's argument, and we'll discuss your answers. And that's how I'm going to structure this practice SAQ time as we go here. So please make sure to leave your viewpoint, your own answers to this document. So this SAQ, answer A. Give you guys a few minutes to do that here. Because, practicing SAQs is like ingenious, because, doing so, if I practice SAQs this early, I probably would have done much better. And I just think it's very, very important for you not to cram for the exam and to practice like this. So be interactive, be engaged, and do participate in this activity. So for all of us that are joining now, I would like you guys to identify one example that supports Subramanian's argument in this excerpt. So I'll give you guys a few more minutes. Please, please, please. One specific example of the ideas in the passage that constitutes 1 point in the SAQ. So make sure to, try your best. Give me one sentence answer. It can help you guys out. So. All right. So one example that I see from this document is the Portuguese trading post empire, because that really consolidates Subramanian's arguments in this statement. Because Subramanian's talking about taxing and subverting the trade of others, and that's exactly what the Portuguese trading post empire was. And that's a great example because the Portuguese trading post empire was really focused upon taxing the ships that go in, and taxing the people who were transporting goods out, and that's how they made their money. And they used maritime balance to kind of establish these trading post empires beyond local resistance. And you can really bring that up. You can talk about how the Portuguese trading post empires were used and how they were used to build a political structure, which may not have been an empire in traditional forms, but was an empire of the Portuguese. So without further ado, let's go on to our next prompt. Explain, again, it's not just identify, it's explain. I explain one example that challenges Subramanian's argument. So just explain one example of Portuguese expansion and the impetus for expansion that does challenge the way Subramanian has implemented this. I'd like you guys to answer this one as well and to think about, what were the Portuguese doing? Why did they expand? And how is this different from what Subramanian was saying? How is it different from exclusive expansion based on taxing and getting wealth? So please, please, please comment about something that challenges Subramanian's argument, a difference with the Portuguese Empire, per se. All right, so I'll go ahead and answer this one for you. So Mr. Beckman says, for B, an answer would be Portuguese doing something different for a different reason. So what Subramanian's really emphasizing here is the Portuguese only expanded for wealth and monetary benefits. So if you guys can just highlight one thing the Portuguese did that wasn't, subsidized or caused by their own wealth-based initiatives, something that was different for them. Why did they do things that they did other than wealth? The other reasons for their expansion. If you guys can list that out, just one thing, that'd be great. All right, so one thing I caught right off the bat is religion. Because the Portuguese were actually, if you guys remember, were Roman Catholic, and they stressed Roman Catholicism in everything that they did. And as with many empires like the French, the Spanish, and the English, they were very, very keen upon spreading their religion, Roman Catholicism, even in the midst of wealth and things like this, because that was their main focus within such a drive. Okay, for C, explain one change in European overseas expansion in Africa and Asia in the years following, 1750 CE. So how did European expansion, the way in which they did so in Africa and Asia, not the New World per se, but Africa and Asia, excuse me for that, change from this period to after 1750 CE into the next period, if you guys know anything about this? So please, 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 I would really love it and appreciate if you guys leave your answers in this comment section. I do see a lot of newcomers in today's stream. 6 of you guys are new, so definitely capitalize upon this opportunity because this is what we're all about here at Fiveable, getting people to answer questions and getting you guys to learn. So a few more minutes for you guys to answer these questions. All right, so if you guys don't have any answer for this question, basically what I would have put for this question is that the European overseas expansion during this period was kind of limited to trading post empires and kind of not this physical, this expansion of territory and kind of just establishing these small little places that where they could garner taxes and garner wealth from. But after this realm in 1750 to later on, the modern period, we see many traditional empires, and these empires kind of forming on the maritime realm, but also having a land-based influence. And I don't know how to describe this kind of per se, but I would say something like the Roman Empire having much more territory than having a Portuguese trading post empire or a Dutch trading post empire, but just consolidating so much territory after 1750 CE, much like a traditional empire. So those are my answers. If you guys want to answer any of them again or give me alternating perspectives, I would love that. But it's optimal for you guys to answer these questions. So I do want you guys to start answering them in future sessions. All right, so a practice multiple choice question. This is the excerpt, the little art we'll be using for these multiple choice questions. It's actually made by Jacob van Moors. Amsterdam receiving the tribute of 4 continents, the front piece of the historical description of Amsterdam in 1663. Tell me what you guys notice. There's a lot of stuff going on in this image, and I do want to hear what you guys notice from this image. So definitely talk to me, tell me about what you guys see. If you guys are just joining us, I'm trying to get you guys to label out what you guys see from this image. I think this is a great MCQ prompt if you guys are trying to learn from the multiple choice questions and how to answer these questions. And Mr. Beckman said, I see a line. That's a great way to start it off. You do see a line in the very middle there. And you see many animals in this little picture, which is talking about Amsterdam. And we see the horse for animals. We see the cheetah. And we see many animals trying to make an influence in this picture. Because, again, Amsterdam was a very culturally inclusive realm and a very trade intensive realm. And we see many animals make their influence, especially in New Amsterdam during this period. We see the king over there, I expect the Netherlands king, and we also see the slaves sitting on the bottom kneeling. We see a slave standing up. We see camels for other animals, and we see many people from different origins. I do see a Muslim trader, I do believe, and just East Asian traders that are kind of influential during this period, and especially to emphasize the overall cultural inclusion and the connectivity of this realm. And camels obviously were from the trans-Saharan region, and just animals from different regions were convening upon Amsterdam. So without further ado, let's begin our multiple choice questions here. So first of all, which of the following provided the most relevant context for the image? A, independence of the Dutch Republic secured after the 30 Years' War. B, military threat to the Protestant Netherlands from Catholic France. C, rivalry with the Portuguese in the Indian Ocean. Or D, wealth generated by state-chartered monopoly companies. So answer the question based on what you see and what you know from history. And again, Donald Diorto said, I see angels. That's a great answer because angels were kind of giving them a religious impetus to explore and to kind of bolster trade during this period. So answer this question, A, B, C, or D, and leave your answer in the comment sections. Because multiple choice questions are a very integral part of the AP examination, so it'd be essential for you guys to kind of practice this in today's session. So any of you, please go ahead and answer this question. Paige says a D. We'll see about that in a little bit. We'll get anybody else to answer these questions. Thank you, Paige, for answering, by the way. All right. So without further ado, the answer is D. D is the correct answer for this question simply because state charter monopoly companies were kind of a trademark of the Dutch. As I talked about earlier, we have the Dutch VOC with the Dutch West India Company, and we have the Dutch New Amsterdam Company. It's a very, very great influence of these state charter monopoly companies, and that should have been a huge indicator for you, but also because Amsterdam was established by the Dutch, and also wealth was heavily generated by these monopoly companies. And it's just, you can see so much wealth. You can see the silver, the ribbons at the very top. You can see a ship in the very background. You can see the king who's lavishly dressed and very, very integrated culturally. We have a lot of things going on in this image. We have a very lavish lifestyle for this king. So you can say a lot of wealth. You can say monopoly companies if you know anything about the Dutch. So I do appreciate you answering, Paige, and that's a very good answer. All right, so next question is, historians could best use this image to illustrate which of the following. A, the Dutch East India Company's use of military force to enforce its spice trade monopoly in Southeast Asia. B, Dutch West India Company's profits from trafficking enslaved people from West Africa to the Caribbean. C, pride felt by many people in the Netherlands due to the riches provided by their empire. And D, the variety of responses by people in Africa, the Americas, and Asia to Dutch imperialism. So if you guys get interested in this question in the comment section, A, B, C, or D, once again. And these are fresh questions. Mr. Beckman wrote them yesterday, and they are very, very fresh. So if you guys have any comments about the questions, make sure to reach out to him as he just laid out in the comments. To answer this question, A, B, C, or D? Paige just said B. Any other answers for you guys? All right, so the answer is actually not B on this question, but the tricky part about this question with a lot of AP questions is that, all of these answers are correct. A is correct because they did use military force, but this is very distantly seen in this image. B is also correct because we can see enslaved slaves in this image, and these slaves were kind of a kind of an integral part of Dutch expansion. And D is also kind of correct because we have a variety of responses in Africa, the Americas, and Asia to Dutch imperialism. But the answer is definitely C. As Mr. Beckman said, the title is Amsterdam receiving tribute from 4 continents. But the main thing we can see from this image is that it integrates all of these aspects. Because if we're thinking about it, slaves are a form of riches. We see different fruits in this image. It's a form of riches. We see angels, which kind of represent royalty. We see royalty in and of itself, Dutch king. And we also see many slaves. We see many animals, which are just an important part of the Dutch influence and the influence of many, many parts of the world upon the Dutch because of their trade. And I just think that, housing all this information is this great, great, great image. I think all the answers are correct, but C is the most important and the most relevant to this image because it utilizes all of these and makes it into a one correct answer. So if that clears it up for you, Paige, I can explain it more for you why it's not B, but it's essentially because enslaved people from West Africa can be seen in this image, but C is a better answer. They're both correct, but C is just simply a better answer because it convenes all of these things, and especially because of this title. And our last question here is, which of the following expresses a way the Dutch Empire differed from the Spanish and Portuguese empires? So A, military conquest in Africa, the Americas, and Asia. B, profits from valuable commodities. C, prominent role of joint stock companies. And D, the use of forced labor to produce trade items. So if you guys can comment on this, A, B, C, or D, use your prior knowledge from the Dutch Empire, as I mentioned earlier, to answer this question. Good luck. Yes, the incorrect answers will be similarities and not differences because this question is kind of based upon a similarities, a comparison kind of aspect, because what you're going to see is only one answer is really differentiated within the Dutch Empire as differentiated from the Spanish and Portuguese empires. And you should be able to see it fairly easily. As I mentioned about the Dutch Empire earlier. So make sure to comment what you think the right answer is. So A, B, C, or D. Any answers for this question? I'll give you a few more minutes here to answer this question. All right, so the correct answer for this question is actually C. And it's because the Dutch was a very, very intensive empire upon joint stock companies. And the Spanish didn't really have a joint stock company that prospered. And the Portuguese West India Company literally lasted for like 155 days or something very short like that. But the Dutch were heavily reliant upon a wide variety of joint stock companies. And I think that really differentiates the Dutch from the Spanish Portuguese empires. And that's what you guys should have chosen for this question. If you guys didn't, please let me know. Military conquests in Africa, the Americas, and Asia were achieved by Spanish and Portuguese. We see, especially by the Portuguese, you should know that because they were a trading post empire in Africa and Asia. And then the profits from valuable commodities. We see all these empires, really maritime empires, profit from valuable commodities, and all these empires use forced labor. So I do think C is the best answer here for you guys, and it's a fairly straightforward answer. All right, so that ends my stream here today. If you guys do want to ask any questions, feel free to do so, because the point of me being here is to answer y'all's questions. I think the main things that I've been answering questions for in the past few streams is my own experiences as an AP student, kind of how to study for the AP examination, and also different content-based topics. So please feel free to answer questions, ask questions. I will be happy to answer them. So we'll give you guys a few minutes here to ask these questions so I can get ahead and answer them. And I appreciate all of y'all joining today's stream. I think it was a very helpful stream, an informational stream, and I really hope you guys to join different streams like this and save your spot for Mr. Diorto's stream, Mr. Beckman's stream later on. So yeah, ask any questions you guys want about my life, about my experiences, about anything in general, AP World History, the Dutch, the Portuguese. And yes, Mr. Dorto has posted Jamal's stream and a link to that. I think that's going to be a great stream for you guys, because Jamal, I've worked with him before. He's a killer student. He's a stellar student, and he knows what he's doing. So taking notes from him will be a great tip for you, because it can really help you out in the AP World History curriculum and just benefiting from him. So if you guys want to ask any questions, I'm here to answer them for a few more minutes. All right, so I will move on. Now, judging that we don't have any questions in the chat room. Okay, so a quick plug to Fiveable. I would like to mention that we're on our socials for Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Think Fiveable, and make sure to follow us to get any updates about upcoming AP World History streams and different streams in AP subjects, study skill streams, things like that. I think it's a great resource. We often post replay content and material, some of them in our YouTube, so definitely subscribe to our YouTube. And if you want to get connected with Fiveable, if this is your first time as a learner, definitely get connected with us. It's a great stream, strategy, and tool for performance come May. Because as you're doing this, you're going to get more information from your lectures, from lectures here, and it can really help you out come the AP examination in May. I would like to plug myself. My Instagram is Kodithala on Instagram. So follow me, and we can probably connect. We can talk about different AP subjects, and let me know about where you guys' flaws are at, where you're trying to learn from in AP World History. Fiveable also has an intercom service on their website, so you can contact me or any other great AP World History teachers or students through this intercom service. So definitely go on the AP World History Fiveable website and type in your questions or comments if they don't come to you today. So I really appreciate you guys joining today's stream, and I hope you guys join Jamal's stream and Mr. Beckman's stream and Mr. Donald Diorto's stream. I'll go back to all of those really quick here, just so you guys can have a visual for that. All right, so here we go. Here's a big visual to show you guys the upcoming streams. Yes, I really appreciate you guys coming here. Thank you guys for joining my stream, and I hope to see you guys later on with Fiveable. Thank you and have a great day.